Frame Control by Aella, a 28-minute read, cross-posted from my blog. When I mention my dad's abuse, I mention salient things, physical pain, insults, and controlling behaviour. These are clearly bad. If I tell you that he often told me I was lazy and would fail horribly at life once I left home, you know it's bad, because it's concrete, easy to imagine, and obviously unkind. But this wasn't the worst of the abuse. The most terrible parts were extraordinarily hard to understand. In this world, I felt insane. I couldn't tell what was real, who was at fault, or why my heart hurt so much. My sense of clarity around my own intentions crumbled. Everything I thought or did might have seemed good on the surface, but the goodness became just a disguise for my true, darker intentions. All helpfully revealed to me by my dad, and none of it was salient, or concrete, or easy to understand. I remember my mum once telling me, I can't describe what this is like to other people. The individual things seem so silly. I can't seem to put the things into words. I'm going to try to put it into words, and the words I personally use for the important thing are frame control. Dank names. This isn't just about my dad, and he wasn't even particularly good at it when children weren't his targets. Frame control pops up everywhere. It's a feature of cults, leaders of some charismatic people, of abusers in relationships, of some parents, of some ideological movements. It hits communities around me, hurt friends of mine. I don't know how to fight it, but I at least want to name it. And naming it is really hard, because at first glance, frame control looks like completely normal behaviour. Every individual instance is not that bad, and when the knife that wounds you is invisible, you might doubt that you're bleeding at all. Frame control is inherently illegible. It's not something that checks a few clear boxes. It's only really visible through the experience of the receiver. In this post, I'm going to advocate for some perspectives that I think can also be really dangerous. I'm going to avoid too many disclaimers or safety warnings throughout, and I will discuss safety altogether at the end. Your frame is basically the set of assumptions you hold about the world around you. In every way there is, your values, your identity, your beliefs about meaning and the social norms and economics and whatever. Although most of it tends to be implicit or subconscious, probably only for a small portion of your frame is directly expressible. Your frame might encompass anything from Jesus is my saviour, to it's bad to touch the sidewalk with your hands, to I am valuable because I am funny. Imagine your frame exists as a box around you. When someone engages with you, they try to get you out of your box and into their box in various ways. This can be stuff like debate, recommendation, pressure, rescue, or aggression. Through debate, it is trying to demonstrate through reason and facts how their box is better. No, sex isn't about power, it's about sex. Here's a study. Recommendation showing that the boxes they are in has been really good for them. An example, viewing my body tension, is actually about childhood trauma, really cleared things up. Pressure, holding social alliance with them as conditional on them joining you in your box. I only really respect people who believe all lives matter. Rescue, offering up their box as the solution for an issue you have. Want to escape your suffering? Become aware of no self. Aggression, trying to push you into their box. You're a piece of shit for denying climate change. You're the reason we're all going to die. I hope that your cancer manifests itself more aggressively. Why don't you just get help, you fucking loser? Most people would have had their lives Sorry. These are all attempts to control your frame, but none of these is what I mean by frame control. These techniques can be manipulative or abusive, but they are broadcast clearly in a similar way to how a man catcalling on a busy street alerts both the target and everyone else to their presence. It's annoying, but clearly legible. It's easy for you and everyone around you to say to each other, that person wants something from you, and move on with your day. N.O. Frame control is the man doesn't announce his presence. He just stalks you silently. Frame control is the man doesn't announce his presence. He just stalks you silently of the communication world. It's when you end up in the other person's box without knowing that it happened. It's not violence you can feel or coaxing you can reason with. It's a slow build of their frame around you until you don't remember whatever your box ever looked like. It's not violence you can feel or coaxing you can reason with. It's a slow building of their frame around you until you don't remember what your box ever looked like. Frame control is quietly subversion of your agency. Instead of offering up their frame for you to consider, they pull you in without consent into a world you probably would never have endorsed from the outside. Frame control often results in doubt, denial, or suppression of your own feelings, as the frame controller has you in their frame and exerts a huge amount of energy to keep you there. Your own experience is warped to align with that of the frame controller, especially when this comes at cost to you. The magnitude probably is enhanced when you are at a sunken cost fallacy. For a very simple, obvious example, not all of them are so obvious, my dad would sometimes command obedience in things that were very painful to obey. For example, permanently ending all contact with my best friend. This made me angry, but his frame treated my anger as a sign that I was sinful and corrupt, and I thus experienced my anger as a failure on my part. I would get angry and then feel guilty for being angry and spend a huge amount of effort suppressing the anger and trying to convince myself I felt grateful for how much effort my dad was putting into his parenting. How is frame control done in such a surreptitious way? Surely you would notice if someone was telling you it's your fault for feeling bad, right? Sometimes frame controllers will make high-risk moves that serve to alienate 90% of people and draw in the other 2%. My organisation is going to save the world. A maybe crazy claim, but if you're the one of the people who really believes it's possible to save the world, or that the world needs saving, you might instead process the claim as instead incredibly brave, because you know 98% of people will think it's stupid, and maybe it is brave. My point is not that the moves are bad or good, only that high variance, high risk moves will fail most of the time, but be very effective when they don't fail. This can make frame control strategies that fail on you seem to be very obvious and easy to avoid, but the frame control strategies that work will feel extremely exciting. Also, frame control is often more likely to happen to vulnerable people. If you're younger or alienated from family, or don't have a great social group, or if you're very weird or neuroatypical and don't easily feel seen, or if you end up in a system where your core needs are controlled by your compliance, romantic relationships and employment and multi-level marketing schemes can fit this. This makes you much more susceptible. Before I'm more direct about identifying frame control, but this is kind of true, but if only because I am an empathetic, open, caring person with zero ill intent, as exactly the kind of good defense actual frame controllers inhabit. The vast majority of good people with good intent aren't doing any significant kind of frame control. My point is just that good person with good intent should not be considered a sufficient defense if there seems to be other elements of frame control present. Much of frame control occurs in the land of things not said. We are constantly, unconsciously making strategic moves in conversation that shift ourselves into more favourable positions. For example, you have a bad fight with your romantic partner and things are tense. Shortly after the fight, you're hanging out within a group of friends. Your partner suggests the group should set up a fund where everyone can contribute to group trips, and the excess in the fund can cover emergencies. You announce this. Sounds like a great idea, that communal bonding is great. You publicly announce reinforcement of your partner's ideas. You publicly announcing reinforcement of your partner's idea has a secondary function of aligning yourself with your partner and communicating to your partner you're still affectionate despite the fight you just had. And maybe your partner says that no, this isn't a communal bonding, this is about handling emergencies. Your partner's words were just clarifying their own meaning, but the secondary function is unaligning themselves with you, pointing out your understanding failure and implying the fight is still ongoing. On the surface, the conversation is normal, but other communication is also happening, likely without conscious knowledge of the participants. The above example is from a personal experience, and when it happened, I had zero conscious knowledge of the secondary function. Conversation, action, and context are overflowing with secondary functions. Words. Wow, this is extremely relevant to the Twitch Discord space and the fucked-head spaces of chatters, orbiters, and our Lord and Saviour himself. Words have effects that aren't just about the words, and so we get things like greetings, like greeting rituals. Hello, how are you? I'm fine. How are you doing? Designed to indicate alliance. I'm busy again means I don't want to date you. Telling the unattractive person they're beautiful just the way they are indicates you are magnanimous and virtuous and value people for their inner spirit or whatever. We often hear these by gut instinct, feeling uncomfortable, feeling affectionate, calm, agitated. We instinctively know the kind of things to say to communicate the right unspoken functions. We get weird feelings around some people, even if we can't put a finger on it. Those examples are more obvious, but the vast majority are trivial. For example, Aubrey de Grey's Facebook post. Aubrey de Grey is a high-profile man who was recently accused of harassment. He wrote a defense of his behaviour, in which he argues that the accusers are not all malicious, but rather were deliberately set up by a third party who fed them misinformation. Not malicious, just stupid. This is the effect of establishing Aubrey as more authoritative than the accusers. He can see the real guilty party, and his accusers cannot. It frames his accusers as innocent and mistaken victims, thus subverting the accusations as valid. The positions Aubrey fairly determined to bring the true guilty parties to justice. Why would you oppose him if you want to pursue the guilty? The examples I'm giving are obvious, salient ones, because they stood out and I remembered them, but most of the time it's a quieter accumulation of 1,000 tiny implications, each one so small that to point one out would sound insane. It might be something like asking the frame controller if they want to go to the store with you, and they respond, "No thanks, because I went last time." A completely innocuous comment, but in the right context it might be an implication that last time they went with you was doing you a favour and making a sacrifice. A lot of it was also not explicitly verbal. It can be how they say it, their body language, where they're placing their attention. Of course, everybody does things that I could recount here and assign a frame to it. We constantly manipulate each other, asking implicitly to be viewed as competent or kind or insightful. And maybe it's good to pay closer attention to this too. But the difference between this everyday thing and the frame control that traumatizes people is generally that of intensity, frequency, and practical control. If it occurs regularly and in direction that consistently reduces trust in your own mind, if it hands the frame control power over your reality and devotion, and if this is backed up with credible threats to your needs, social acceptance, income, etc., then I am much more likely to give it a frame control label. I provide examples of what's not frame control later. If you try to point out the secondary effects, a related strategy is pushing the painful update button. I'm sure you've had experiences where you learned and grew, and it was really painful to do so. You had to face some hard truths, letting go of how you saw yourself, and maybe even do a bit of surrendering of your ego. This is legitimately good. But a key aspect of frame control is reframing harm as good, and so the pain from beneficial updates becomes an easy candidate. You might be promised insight about yourself, usually handed to you by the frame controller, and pain from those insights get reinterpreted as evidence. Fucking kill me. reinterpreted as evidence that the insights are valuable. No pain, no gain. This also tends to be more common in the mediation communities, where they might encourage things. Meditation communities, where they might encourage things like very hard work or a lack of food or sleep. What did you think growth was going to feel good? The norm is whispered from every corner. The pain you feel from this community and its leader is what growth means. What is the upside? Just feel more pain and get less change? Hello? To be clear, a lot of this is true. Frame control breaks your reality down to fit another one. And while I view this as poisonous, the act of breaking down your frame can have huge benefits. Similarly to how forcing a child to sit through school might break their creativity, but give them the ability to reliably perform long, boring tasks. When I first started doing LSD, I recognised a lot of parallels between the drug and my upbringing. Oh, this is the same thing, I told my sister, who was tripping with me for the first time. Dad broke us in the same way. He just did it violently. Being mentally broken by an abuser was super educational. Super educational. It annihilated my sense of fight. It taught me how to surrender, how to handle huge amounts of pain without resisting, how to let go of everything I loved. And in LSD, though a vastly different tone and infinitely more healthy, I somehow encountered the same basic story. Here we find a previous article from Aella girl. Wait, does it have a date? It's from 2009, in the third part of the year. So from about a year before this article came out. 2019, sorry. This is maybe 2 or 3 years before this article came out. This is part of the reason why escaping frame control situations can be so disorientating. Frame control situations can give you legitimate, valuable insight. It can open up deep, tender parts of your soul. You might genuinely love the frame controller. It can be some of the most meaningful experiences you've had. The basic story is a good one. It's just that the goal of frame control is someone else's power over you. The story is infused and poison. They grant you profound awe in exchange for serving them, and the combination of valuable insight at the level of your soul mixed in with poison and subjugation to someone else's will can be a deeply traumatizing experience. People who escape frame control often have a really hard time making sense of the world or themselves, or what is good or bad, or how to feel. Their own sense of judgment has been undermined so thoroughly they don't trust themselves to hold their own frame anymore. Zoe Kersey, who worked at Leverage, Medium.com, my experience with leverage research. Zoe Kersey says, a key confusing feature of leaving is that you weren't acknowledging the badness and now you have to. And for a while, the badness is all-consuming because it's the main thing you weren't allowed to acknowledge while maintaining your relationship to the community or person controlling you. But something about this is also fucky for sense-making because it doesn't acknowledge the powerful soul insights. But if you acknowledge only those, you'll never leave. So the extreme creates a yo-yo in recovery that often makes sense-making and integration an extremely long process, possibly never finished, very incoherent along the way. In a lot of ways, this is similar to an abusive upbringing. As a child, you bond tightly with the parent who teaches you, cares for you, molds your reality. You rely on them, and many wonderful things you value come from your relationship with them. So how do you come to terms with a world without them? I'm talking... Oh my god. We're only a quarter of the way through. I'm talking a bit philosophically about frame control, but in an attempt to get more concrete, here's a non-exhaustive list of some frame control symptoms. Keep in mind, these are not the same thing as frame control itself. They are just red flags. Some of these overlap strongly with traditional cult signifiers. Also, not all frame control has all of these. Okay, actually we're almost at the end. We just have a list of 30 things to read. Okay, so here are some philosophical ways to look at frame control. This is a non-exhaustive list, but not all of these are specifically frame control. Frame control has all of these, or a frame controller. They do not demonstrate vulnerability in conversation, or if they do, it somehow processes as still invulnerable. They don't laugh nervously, don't give any tiny signals that they are malleable and interested to conforming to your opinion or worldview. I once had a long talk with a very smart man who was widely perceived as deeply compassionate and kind, but long after the talk I realised at no point in the conversation had he indicated being impacted by my ideas, despite there being multiple opportunities for him to make at least very small acknowledgements that I was onto something good. It took me a long time to realise this, because he had started out the conversation by framing me as special, telling me it was unusual to find someone else who had the ideas I did, but I must have taken a different path. He is someone who respects me, was the frame he set up, and so I was blinded to the stark lack of reinforcement or vulnerability he actually displayed. This guy still has a lot of social power, and I don't feel comfortable yet publicly naming him. My third eye is telling me his name begins with Sam. They have status and power. A key component that makes frame control dangerous is when it's linked to concrete consequences. Maybe people really respect them. Maybe they control resources. Maybe they are the person throwing big events. Maybe they gave you a new name. Maybe they have the power to exclude you from your social groups. Maybe they have the power to physically destroy you. Who knows? Less powerful people can also do frame control, but it tends to be tighter. I feel like she's avoiding the fact that this is could be physically abusive relationships. Less powerful people can also do frame control, but it tends to be tighter. Although maybe she's more drawn towards the extreme power of frame control, and despite its hidden nature. Finger trap beliefs. My term for beliefs, where pulling against the belief only strengthens the belief. One example is how Christians say that Satan will make you doubt the existence of God. If you find yourself doubting the existence of God, this gets processed as evidence for Satan. Similarly, frame controllers will instill beliefs designed to clamp down if you ever doubt the frame controller. Other people will try to tell you you're misguided because they're too afraid of our power. Results in, if I entertain the notion that the leader is misguided, does this mean I'm too afraid of their power? Frame controllers will often reframe ideas that challenge them as red flags that point to deeper flaws in the questionnaire. Often these defenses are established well in advance of the challenging idea, so that your mimetic immune system gets disabled long before it has the chance to get activated. Reframing harm as beneficial. I discussed this earlier, but to reiterate, in normal life we have self-protection instincts that tell us to run away from things that hurt. We also have norms where we're not taught to do this. Spending your childhood sitting in school might suck, but it's for your own good, so we had to accept it, which is bad in my opinion. Frame controllers use prior understanding that sometimes things I don't like are good for me, and they make sure to map this onto everything about the frame controller you don't like. Your pain, through one narrative or another, is evidence of goodness. Sometimes, when your pain is processed as evidence of goodness, you often stop processing it as pain entirely. If you've never looked back on a period of your life with shock that you could have handled that, likely this is because you viewed the harm as beneficial and thus did not process it as pain at all. This is often actively reinforced by frame controllers who inhabit a worldview where it's just not an option that a thing might be causing you pain. They are the teachers and you are the student. They might make you perfunctory gestures towards learning from you, but the general attitude upheld by them, and also the culture around you, is that the knowledge passes from them to you. Unlike in traditional teaching, this usually extends to all things. They are uncomfortable with you holding subcategories of expertise, and will tolerate it only insofar as they can take credit for your power in some way or maintain a narrative where they have the ability to ultimately judge the value of or role of what you are presenting. They might take steps to keep you in a position of a student, such as deliberately giving you tasks you're bad at, or placing you in situations that make you deeply uncomfortable, with good for you explanations included, of course. Aella has talked about this before, the need for people to keep you in a student role. It is good sometimes being in a student role to be in a position of learning. However, if people are trying to force you into it and they say that it's good for you to be a student, and this is again like very big with like meditation circles where like I am the guru, good for you for like trying really hard to reach enlightenment, but you're just not quite there yet. Sorry, that's hydration time. Insofar as they grant you actual authority, it will only be after they are convinced of your absolute unfailing loyalty. A belief in their own importance. They often feel they have unique access to some knowledge that you can only get through them, whether it be religious or mystical or a complete theory of psychology. A refusal to affirm ways in which your frame falls outside of theirs. In healthier relationships, people tend to approach each other's frames, as in set aside their own worldview in a moment, inhabit the other person's, and talk to them from that frame. Frame controllers don't do this. They do not come to you. They do not acknowledge or validate your frame. There might be some performative aspects of this. For example, saying, "I know this is so hard," while the rest of their speech subtly doesn't seem to indicate they actually understand what is hard. When conflicts or disagreements happen, they operate with an assumption that you simply haven't seen the light yet. They might be very magnanimous about this, or listen to you for a long time, or say things like, "That's a great point," but their attitude seems to imply that there's not actually a possible reality where you are correct. They are gently, caringly waiting for you to realize the thing that they knew all along. They are so helpful. They are patient as they help you to see the one truth. And if they have the one truth, how many other things are they right about that you simply can't see yet because you haven't tried hard enough? Number 10. There's a narrative of openness and flexibility that deflects from the areas of inflexibility. I'm so patient and kind, their actions imply, as they graciously sacrifice hours of their attention helping you to work through why you don't want to do a task they want you to do. They orientate around their turf. They prefer to decide location and methods of debates. They want you to come to their house. Maybe they sit while you stand. Maybe they don't give interviews while anybody slightly hostile. They don't give interviews with anybody slightly hostile. Maybe they want you to come on their show, which is a link to Richard Hart Wynne. They want you to come on their show and frame it as evidence of wrongdoing if you decline. The only wrongdoing here is my laziness as a degenerate. Number 12. They consistently reroute pressure away from them. I once sat in a dojo where I watched one of the students point out an error the teacher had made. The teacher then responded by asking the student a question that investigated what was behind the pointing out. Well, what was really about them that caused this? The resulting discussion then was entirely about the student. As far as I can tell, everybody else forgot about the mention of the error. My dad used to refer to this tactic explicitly. Make sure they are always on the defensive. Don't give them room to have energy for offense. Similar to the above, they ask questions with forced answers, a common tactic in police interviews. When explicit, did you leave your dish in the sink? You know that I don't like that, right? You left your dish in the sink, knowing I don't like it, right? So you admit you are intentionally upsetting me? Why do you have a box on your desk that is the perfect size to fit my mother-in-law's wedding ring? Is there a bag in your pocket? Where did you get that $50? Sometimes it's less explicit. For example, years ago I was at a large group dinner with acquaintances and a woman I didn't like. She was talking about something I wasn't interested in, mostly to a few other people at the table, and I drifted to looking at my phone. The woman then said loudly, "Oh, looks like I'm boring Aella." This put me in a position where I had to choose either being honest, based, and drastically escalating the social tension, or to politely disagree and thus lend social validation to what she was doing. They make buried claims. This buried claims word leads to the Wikipedia page for presupposition. Presupposing, one we know well. They make buried claims, assertions that pressure you to jump through hoops to challenge the core. For example, everybody knows you're sensitive. Ask you to challenge everybody knowing before you can challenge being sensitive. If you angrily ask them to stop opening the door without knocking, they might say, "Annoyance is understandable, but it comes from a desire for privacy instilled into you by an isolated society." If you want to tell them your annoyance is important, know that you have to argue for an isolated society or that it's not caused by society. Number 15, they constantly redirect to salient measures. This is a very classic example with abusive parents, when they point out how they're feeding and clothing you as an appeal to being a good parent. I remember once, shortly after I went no contact with my dad, he surprise visited me at the library where I worked. Upon seeing him, I fled into the staff area and hid under a table and curled into a fetal position and sobbed. When a co-worker found me, all I could say was, "Don't worry, it's okay, he didn't hit me. I was worried my co-worker would think I'd been abused. I was embarrassed by my dramatic overreaction and didn't want to be misleading. At the time, I didn't process my childhood as abusive because my dad had constantly redirected me to salient measures. Yeah, this is probably why this works better on children, because salient measures need to be countered with very direct and also salient responses, which becomes like a battle of wits that children are just not equipped for. A refusal to collaborate with other perspectives. Most interactions have a normal push-pull of power, usually designed to distribute it evenly throughout the group. An obvious, simple example is responding to a compliment with a self-effacating joke. Self-effacing? I don't know. A refusal to collaborate with other perspectives. In this regard, frame controllers are antisocial rather than cooperative. They don't participate with the group in evenly distributing power. They subvert other perspectives in service of their own power. Alright, that's one list done. So if frame control looks so similar to just being a normal person, what are some signs that someone isn't doing frame control? Keep in mind that these are pointers, not absolute, and not doing these doesn't mean someone is doing frame control. 1. They give you power over them, like indications that they want your approval or unconditional support in areas you are superior to them. They signal to you that they are vulnerable to you. Number 2. You feel really deeply loved by them. Frame controllers often say they love you, or have demonstrations of love, like loyalty, but often lacked a subtle, profound attention and selfless care. For example, both my mum and my dad made terrible parenting mistakes, and both said they loved me, but I could feel the selfless care from my mum, and it was notably absent from my dad. Number 3. They repeatedly validate your reality. Wholeheartedly. without subtle implications otherwise. And even when they don't agree, they defer to you as an authority on yourself. So this would be an example of her mother loving her, making her mother not a frame controller, or at least indicating that her mother might not be a frame controller. Number 4, for reasons why people are potentially not frame controllers, acceptance. In a sense, they view you as perfect the way you are. They assume your hidden intentions ultimately come from a place of deep goodness. While you might be attempting to fix things about yourself, they carry an attitude that you are fundamentally okay. Number 5, you don't have to justify your preferences. While they might inquire about them, they respect what you want, even if they don't understand why. Even if it seems irrational, even if you have no idea why, your wants are treated as fundamentally valid, regardless of what generated them. Frame control is damaging when it's invisible. If you are fully aware of it, it might affect you similarly to how most normal salient attempts to move frames do, like debating or persuasion. For this reason, I don't think all frame control is inherently harmful. It's possible, for example, to be close friends with a heavy frame controller while being fully aware of all the frame control moves they might be doing. I think this is really hard to achieve, though. Being very close with someone almost by default means vulnerability to each other's frames. When you want to get in their world, empathize with them, see things the way they do, and especially if you respect them, this is how the frame control slips through. And this is why my general philosophy for people who frame control is burn it with fire. The fuck? She just really took a very hard stance. I don't think this with any other human flaw. People with terrible communication skills, traumatized people who lash out, anxious, needy people who will try to soak the life out of you, furious, dox-prone people on the internet. I believe there's an empathetic route forward. Not so with frame control. Frame control uses the pathways of love, desire to do good, empathy of any sort of human connection. Pushing the painful update button is effective because people genuinely want to grow. Finger trap beliefs snap shut because, for example, you were shown just how much the outside world persecutes this person. You are genuinely moved to be the one that shows them true kindness. You look for their human intent. You imagine what it's like to be them. You empathetically step into their world, and when it clamps down around you, you empathetically step into the world and then it clamps down around you. Right, so no empathy, just fire. It is a Venus flytrap of danger. It's hard to say anything to compare frame control with, which is why I guess she said at the beginning that it's inherently unable to be put into a brief definition or even specifically stated saliently. Which then again makes it very strange that we would try to burn it with fire if it's not something we can actually identify properly. In this, I am a conflict theorist. The word conflict theorist leads to Slate's Star Codex, conflict versus mistake. Interesting. In this, I am a conflict theorist. This is not a mistake, this is war. And a part of me knows this ain't true. As in, I could have been born into a brain that ended up doing strong frame control. I know that they are real people with feelings and needs, but that true perspective will let them destroy you. When I run into strong frame control, I snap to an extremely antagonist frame. No, you are not allowed into my life, my home, my friends, and I will try to remove you from the power you might use to hurt anybody else. Maybe I'm being overly dramatic about this, because I'm more vulnerable to frame control than most, but another part of me simply doesn't care. They will use your fear of being overly dramatic to undermine your reality. Breaking out of a frame control is really high cost. In cults, this is often clear. You lose your community or financial support or whatever, but the cost can be internal. With frame control, you have to decide between two worlds. They are normal and I am bad. and they are fucked up and I am sane. And if they are fucked up, you have to be able to believe you need to separate from them, to cut them off from you fully. This is really hard to do. For a normally empathetic person, the idea that someone could be so confused as to be so harmful that I have literally no idea how they could be healthfully allowed close to me or people I love is very, very tragic. A quote from Zoe. Part of the motivation for inhabiting a world where anybody you love can be saved is this means you yourself might be savable. I have a wonderful friend who often invites questionable people to parties. I suspect it's because he views himself as questionable, and demonstrating inclusion to other questionable people is a way of demonstrating to himself that he will also be included. We want unconditional love and acceptance to be possible because we want it for ourselves, and so solidly ejecting someone else is a destruction of that possibility. It means someone can be so bad that they're ejected out into the dark, and you have to stand there staring at the decompression chamber as you press the button to open the doors into space. It's brutal, and it hurts, and it's terrifying. Who are you that you could do that to someone? Who are you that you know your ship is surrounded by space? A lot of things I'm pushing in this post are pretty dangerous. I'm handing you a label of frame control and giving it permission to cut off empathy, to stop investigating your own motivations, to squint super hard at possible subtle motivations in others, to stop looking at intent and only look at effect. This is basically the opposite of all good advice, and even worse, it seems like it might give a license to use frame control as a weapon. Not just on others, but also on ourselves. Technically, I forgot to say dank memes. Technically, everybody frame controls all the time. We can probably find numerous examples where every one of us, including me, does the things I outline as bad. And people who frame control may also accuse others of frame control as a weapon for sowing self-doubt and dismiss accusations of frame control at themselves as simply weapons for sowing seeds of self-doubt. I don't know how to address this problem. This is partially because it's a moving target. As soon as frame control is named and described, then it can get good-hearted. Frame controllers will use this as an instruction manual to become less visible. It's also because frame controllers exist as a subversion of normal behaviour. As the salient stuff is labelled bad, they stop doing the salient stuff. All the bad gets squeezed down into the cracks below our feet, and now you can't tell which parts of the floor are poisoned just by looking at it. And if we manage to point at a spot and label the poison, it becomes salient, and the whole process starts again. If someone tries to use this blog to argue for someone doing frame control that you don't see, it's okay to be a little bit skeptical. If they try to use it to argue that someone isn't doing frame control, but you still feel a weird unsettledness you can't name, it's okay to still feel unsettled. Don't let this post tell you how you should feel. Take this article lightly, take it as a pointer, take it as art. Ultimately, checking in how you actually feel is the answer. I don't mean to imply this is easy. It's often really hard to know how you feel, and maybe it changes often, and frame controllers put you in a lot of effort to obfuscate this. But in the end, careful attention to your own sensations are your saving grace. Given the inclusion of names doesn't mean I endorse everything they post, I'd like to thank Zoe Kersey, Lawrence Kestelute, Malcolm Ocean, Danny Philin, Alexander, Melody Trainer, Elizabeth Van Nostrand, Hrothgar, Catherine Devaney, Catherine Olsen, and a few other anonymous contributors for leaving feedback and suggestions on the post as I developed it. Wow, that was really interesting. It had some depth with her, with some fucking emotional moments with her crying under the table. Had a whole lot of things. Definitely makes me think that as debaters and fans of Twitch politics, we are all interested in moving our own frames, which probably attracts people who often generalise or interpret things in very weird ways, who can seem very mature and artistic, such as Brittany and Mr. Gill. and they probably view Stephen in the same way. However, a massive difference between Brittany, Stephen and Mr. Gill is that Stephen is constantly allowing us to be aware that our frames are being pushed. He's probably more salient than all the rest of these things, and more allowing us to push back on his frames. Which then for people like Mr. Gill especially became unbearable when the entire fucking community turned out to be pretty much too highly adept then like for him to be able to like mass manipulate and control us. Big shout out to Forethought for fully going to war with that man. What can a man do against such hatred? We ride out to meet it. Aragorn, Lord of the Rings. GG.